AccioAttorney, a trustworthy muggle in the wizarding world. At long last, I have progressed far enough into the game to start showing you the path that Harry will walk in 100 years. I will be reading the passages in the books that describe Harry traveling from one location to another. One thing to keep in mind is that the Hogwarts architect, whose statue we pass as we are making our way from the Great Hall to the Grand Staircase, designed and oversaw the construction of Hogwarts alongside founder Rowena Ravenclaw. Later on in the game, we will discover from a Revelio page that Ravenclaw is credited with the castle's ever-changing floor plan. Because the castle is ever-changing, I will show you the path that Harry would have taken had the castle stayed the same in 1990 as it was in 1890. So as I read passages from the book that detail Harry's journey through the castle, keep in mind that you will be seeing something different than what is described in the books. We start with the first time Harry sees the castle in the Sorcerer's Stone at the end of Chapter 6, the journey from Platform 9 3/4. The path seems longer here than it is in the books, but I can just imagine the nervous excitement that must have been going through a young 11-year-old Harry Potter as he approached what would become his new home. He's unaware of the excitement and danger that will follow for the next 7 years. But, at the very least, he's glad to be rid of the Dursleys and find himself a new family. Now I will begin reading from page 111 of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Slipping and stumbling, they followed Hagrid down what seemed to be a steep, narrow path. It was so dark on either side of them that Harry thought there must be thick trees in there. Nobody spoke much. Neville, the boy who kept losing his toad, sniffed once or twice. "You'll get your first sight of Hogwarts in a sec," Hagrid called over his shoulder. "Just round the bend here." There was a loud "ooh." The narrow path had opened suddenly onto the edge of a great black lake. Perched atop a high mountain on the other side, its windows sparkling in the starry sky, was a vast castle with many towers and turrets. "No more'n 4 to a boat," Hagrid called, pointing to a fleet of little boats sitting in the water by the shore. Harry and Ron were followed into their boat by Neville and Hermione. "Everyone in?" shouted Hagrid, who had a boat to himself. "Right then. Forward!" And the fleet of little boats moved off all at once, gliding across the lake, which was as smooth as glass. Everyone was silent, staring up at the great castle overhead. It towered over them as they sailed nearer and nearer to the cliff on which it stood. "Heads down!" yelled Hagrid as the first boats reached the cliff. They all bent their heads, and the little boats carried them through a curtain of ivy that hid a wide opening in the cliff face. They were carried along a dark tunnel which seemed to be taking them right underneath the castle, until they reached a kind of underground harbor where they clambered out onto rocks and pebbles. "Oi, you there! Is this your toad?" said Hagrid, who was checking the boats as people climbed out of them. "Trevor!" cried Neville blissfully, holding out his hands. Then they clambered up a passageway in the rock after Hagrid's lamp, coming out at last onto smooth, damp grass right in the shadow of the castle. They walked up a flight of stone steps and crowded around the huge oak front doors. "Everyone here? You there, still got your toad?" Hagrid raised a gigantic fist and knocked 3 times on the castle door. As you can see, when we approached the gates up to the Hogwarts grounds, there were fewer trees in the 1890s than the 1990s. We got a nice view of the castle right away, whereas in the books, the castle is shrouded by the trees until they reach the lake. Another major difference is that the boats in the book travel into the cliff to an underground harbor. This game, like the movies, includes a boathouse at the foot of the cliff instead. I appreciate the flight of stone steps that allows us to see an absolutely amazing view of the landscape. We also learn that the large oak front doors in the game, as well as in the movies, are one of many possible entrances inside the castle. Whereas in the books, there's only one entrance in and out. Now, as we get closer to entering the castle, Harry's anticipation must be growing. We will enter the castle and read from Chapter 7 of The Sorcerer's Stone, The Sorting Hat. From page 113 of The Sorcerer's Stone. The door swung open at once. A tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robes stood there. She had a very stern face, and Harry's first thought was that this was not someone to cross. "The first years, Professor McGonagall," said Hagrid. "Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here." She pulled the door wide. The entrance hall was so big you could have fit the whole of the Dursleys' house in it. The stone walls were lit with flaming torches like the ones at Gringotts. The ceiling was too high to make out, and the magnificent marble staircase facing them led to the upper floors. They followed Professor McGonagall across the flagged stone floor. Harry could hear the drone of hundreds of voices from a doorway to the right. The rest of the school must already be here. But Professor McGonagall showed the first years into a small, empty chamber off the hall. They crowded in, standing rather closely together than they would usually have done, peering about nervously. Feeling oddly as though his legs had turned to lead, Harry got into line behind a boy with sandy hair, with Ron behind him, and they walked out of the chamber, back across the hall, and through a pair of double doors into the Great Hall. Harry had never even imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles that were floating in midair over 4 long tables where the rest of the students were sitting. These tables were laid with glittering golden plates and goblets. At the top of the hall was another long table where the teachers were sitting. Professor McGonagall led the first years up here so that they came to a halt in line facing the other students with the teachers behind them. He took off the hat and walked shakily toward the Gryffindor table. We notice again that this castle mirrors the castle in the movies rather than the books. In the books, the marble staircase would be directly in front of the students and not off to the right. Instead, the Great Hall should be off to the right. We are also missing the small empty chamber off to the left of the entrance hall, where the students wait before entering the Great Hall. And based on later readings of the books, it's my belief that the door to the Great Hall should be to Harry's right and not in front of him. At any rate, after a nice meal, Harry heads to his dorm for the very first time. The Gryffindor first years followed Percy through the chattering crowds, out of the Great Hall, and up the marble staircase. He was too sleepy even to be surprised that the people in the portraits along the corridors whispered and pointed as they passed, or that twice Percy led them through doorways hidden behind sliding panels and hanging tapestries. They climbed staircases, yawning and dragging their feet. And Harry was just wondering how much further they had to go when they came to a sudden halt. At the very end of the corridor hung a portrait of a very fat woman in a pink silk dress. They all scrambled through it. Neville needed a leg up, and found themselves in the Gryffindor common room. A cozy, round room full of squashy armchairs. Percy directed the girls through one door to their dormitory and the boys through another. At the top of a spiral staircase, they were obviously in one of the towers, they found their beds at last. 5 four-posters hung with deep red velvet curtains. As we notice here in the game, the path that Harry takes is much shorter than the one in the books. In the books, we need to navigate through hidden passageways behind sliding panels and different tapestries. But in 1890, Gryffindor Tower is just up this staircase, only 1 floor up. The most direct route doesn't include a couple detours, but just 1 turn and up a staircase. We still do see the fat lady at the end of a long corridor in a pink silk dress, though. And the common room, as we are about to see, does really have that cozy feel with squashy armchairs. However, after Harry goes through the portrait hole, there aren't two sets of doorways concealing both the boys' and the girls' dormitories. There's just one archway that he walks through. It does have two sets of stairs, though, the boys to the left and the girls to the right.
What are you up to now?
Also, we notice that Harry doesn't need to walk up a lot of steps in order to reach the top. His dorm is at the very top of the tower at the end of a spiral staircase, whereas in this game, the character only needs to walk up one flight of steps. However, at the top of this spiral staircase, we do get to see a dorm room with 5 four-poster beds. I'm glad that this game keeps the feel of the deep red velvet curtains. I'd recognize this room anywhere, and Harry is finally in bed after his first night at Hogwarts.